AITA for going to dinner after my mom tried to erase me from my dad's legacy? I'm Leah, 34, and in my family I was never the favorite daughter. I was the daughter people called when the caterer canceled, when mom needed a ride, when a bill had to be handled quietly, or when my older sister, Paige, forgot to do the thing she had already accepted praise for. My younger brother, Jonah, was the one everyone protected from stress. Paige was the one everyone admired. I was the one they relied on and resented for remembering what things cost. I keep old receipts in a cracked blue recipe box in my kitchen. My dad, Frank, gave it to me years ago after I helped him sort through a stack of household bills. Paper remembers better than people, he told me. At the time I thought he was teaching me how to stay organized. It took me years to understand that he was also warning me. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. For days before the family anniversary dinner my mother had been planning for months. The dinner was to celebrate what would have been my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Dad had been gone for nearly 2 years, but Mom had decided the date should still be honored because, as she kept telling everyone, a marriage does not stop mattering just because one person is no longer at the table. I had helped her reserve folding tables from the church hall. I had paid the deposit on the sheet cake after she said her card was acting strange. I'd emailed cousins for slideshow photos, corrected the dates on half the captions, and called 3 stores before finding the brand of sparkling cider she insisted Dad always liked. Paige had chosen the cake flavor. Mom told everyone Paige was making sure the evening felt like Frank. The subject line of the email was, "Final speech draft. Don't send to Leah." For a few seconds I assumed Mom had forwarded me the wrong attachment about seating or food. She had been sending revised lists all week. One email was about who should bring deviled eggs. Another was 3 paragraphs about why Aunt Beth should not be seated beside a cousin she had argued with at Thanksgiving. Then I opened the document. It was 6 pages long. Mom had typed the speech in a large font and printed notes to herself in brackets. Pause here. Look at Paige. Let my voice shake. She had even marked where she wanted the slideshow paused on a photograph of Dad holding the 3 of us when we were children. The first 2 pages were mostly about Dad. They were sentimental, polished, and familiar. Mom described him as steady, patient, and devoted. She talked about the sacrifices they had made and the family they had built. Then the speech changed. "There is always one child," she had written, "who mistakes independence for strength and distance for dignity." I kept reading. She called me cold. She said I kept score. She said I had become too independent to care about family. She wrote that I only helped when I could later use it as leverage, which was almost impressive considering I had never publicly mentioned a single bill I had paid. Then I reached the phrase that made my hands go numb. "Leah has become a walking stain on this family's memory of love." I read it twice. Underneath it, in the margin, Mom had typed, "Slow down here." I whispered. She wrote this like a toast. The final page was worse. Mom planned to announce that Paige would take control of Dad's personal keepsakes, family records, and decisions involving several old assets that still hadn't been sorted out. She described Paige as the daughter who stayed loyal, and said it was time for the family to stop allowing resentment and instability to interfere with protecting Dad's legacy. The instability was me. The resentment was apparently my refusal to pretend Paige had handled everything after Dad died. I scrolled back to the email itself. Mom had written only one line above the attachment. "Please review and tell me if the ending sounds strong enough." The email had been intended for Paige. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone beside me and the blue recipe box on the counter. My first instinct was to call Paige, but I knew what she would do. She would soften her voice, tell me Mom was grieving, and ask me not to react until everyone had time to calm down. Paige had built an entire personality around sounding reasonable, while benefiting from unreasonable things. So I called Mom directly. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hi, honey," she said too brightly. "I'm in the middle of organizing the place cards. You emailed me your speech." There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A caught pause. "What speech?" "The one titled, 'Don't Send to Leah.'" I heard paper moving on her end, then a small sigh. "Oh, that's all you have to say? Leah, I'm very busy right now. You called me a walking stain. You weren't supposed to see that yet." The word "yet" landed harder than the insult. "Yet," I said. Don't twist my words. This is exactly why people worry about you. You seize on one phrase and turn it into a trial. You were planning to read it in front of the whole family. It is not an attack. It is a reflection. A reflection of what? Of how things have felt. To you. To many people. Which people? She exhaled sharply. I'm not doing this on the phone. You can come Saturday, sit with the family, and act like an adult. Or you can stay home and prove every concern in that speech. I looked again at the last page, where she planned to hand Paige authority she didn't legally have. Did Paige help you write it? That is not relevant. It was meant for her. Paige understands that families sometimes need difficult honesty. I almost laughed. Paige understood difficult honesty the way a person sitting under an umbrella understood rain. Are you going to apologize? I asked. For sending the wrong email, yes. For writing it? No. I will not apologize for speaking from my heart. I ended the call before I said something she could use. Mom called back twice. I let it ring. 10 minutes later, Paige texted me. Mom told me what happened. Please do not make this about yourself. I stared at the message until another one appeared. She is fragile, Leah. You know that. Then, this dinner is about Dad. Don't embarrass Mom. I wrote she was planning to publicly call me unstable and hand you control of Dad's things. The typing bubble appeared, vanished, then appeared again. Nobody is saying you never helped. That wasn't an answer. I sent, did you help write the speech? She replied almost immediately. This is not the time for accusations. Another non-answer. Jonah texted less than an hour later. Can we please just get through Saturday? I asked whether he had read the speech. He said no. Then he wrote, I'm not taking sides. I replied, asking me to absorb it quietly as taking a side. He didn't answer. That evening, Aunt Beth left me a voicemail. Her voice had the careful tone people use when they want credit for kindness without risking disagreement with the person in power. Leah, sweetheart, your mom told me there was a misunderstanding with the anniversary remarks. I know you are hurt. Maybe you are both hurting. I just hope you will not punish the entire family over one draft written in grief. Call me when you are calmer. I listened to it twice. Nobody had asked Mom to be calmer. Nobody had told Paige not to make the dinner about herself. Nobody had told Jonah that neutrality was a luxury paid for by someone else's silence. I went to bed angry, but anger wasn't new. What kept me awake was Mom's word. Yet, she hadn't regretted the speech. She regretted the timing of my discovery. Sometime after midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen. The blue recipe box sat where it always did, wedged between a stack of takeout menus and a ceramic bowl filled with spare keys. The lid had a split near one hinge. Inside were repair invoices, old checks, transfer confirmations, funeral receipts, copies of utility payments, and notes in Dad's blocky handwriting. Behind the recipe box was a narrow drawer I rarely opened. That was where I had put Dad's envelope. He had given it to me about 3 months before he died. We had been sitting at Mom's dining table while she and Paige argued in the next room about which photograph should be enlarged for a family reunion. Dad was tired that day. He looked thinner than he had the week before, and his hand shook when he slid the envelope toward me. It had my name on the front. For later, he said. What's in it? Something you may need if the story starts changing. I smiled because I thought he was being dramatic. He didn't smile back. Do not open this because someone cries louder than you, he said. Open it when you know you need facts. After he died, I asked Mom whether there was paperwork I should know about. She told me Dad had been confused near the end and had repeated himself a lot. She said everything important had already been handled with Mr. Harlan, the attorney who had helped with parts of Dad's estate planning. I had almost opened the envelope then. Instead, I let grief and exhaustion convince me it could wait. Now I took it out of the drawer. The paper had softened at the corners. Dad's handwriting looked exactly as I remembered it, heavy on the downstrokes, the L in my name leaning slightly to the left. There was a smaller note taped to the back. For Leah when the story starts changing. I sat down. For a long minute I only held it. Opening it felt final in a way his funeral hadn't. The funeral had been noise, flowers, casseroles, people touching my arm. The envelope was his voice waiting in silence. I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, a notarized document, copies of several bank records, and a typed page listing specific items and accounts. The first line of the letter made me cover my mouth. Leah, if you are reading this, somebody has probably decided your silence means agreement. I kept going. Dad wrote that he loved all three of us, but he knew our family had developed a pattern. Mom protected Paige because Paige needed admiration. She protected Jonah because Jonah avoided discomfort. And she leaned on me because I could handle things. He didn't call Mom evil. That would have been easier. He called her afraid. He wrote that she was afraid of conflict, afraid of looking like she had failed, and afraid of losing control once people stopped accepting the version of events she gave them. Then he wrote, "You are the child she trusts with work and distrusts with recognition. That is not because you have failed her. It is because giving you credit would force other people to face what they have avoided." I had to stop reading. For years, I'd wondered whether I was secretly as transactional as Mom said. Maybe keeping receipts made me petty. Maybe remembering who paid what meant I didn't understand family. Maybe reliable people were supposed to erase their own labor as soon as it was done. Dad had seen the pattern. He had seen me. The notarized document named me as a required consenting party for the transfer, sale, or permanent distribution of several categories of property, Dad's military keepsakes, his watches, a set of signed documents connected to his father's small business, several boxes of family records, and proceeds from 2 assets that were still pending final disposition. I didn't own everything. I wasn't secretly the sole heir. The document did something more believable and, for Mom, probably more frustrating. It prevented unilateral control. My written approval was required before those items could be sold, transferred, donated, or permanently given to any one family member. A separate page referenced money Dad had received from a small settlement years earlier. He had given the funds to Mom for family support, but his handwritten note was clear. The money was meant to remain available for all 3 children if a real need arose. It was not intended to cover Paige's private debts, replace Jonah's missed payments, or become a reward for whichever child performed loyalty best. One bank copy showed the original amount. Another showed withdrawals I didn't recognize. At the bottom of Dad's letter, he had written, "I trust you because you will follow instructions even when nobody applauds. Do not let anyone make you owe the family silence. Loyalty that requires a lie is only control wearing a nicer name." I cried then. Not loudly. I sat at the kitchen table with my hand pressed over my eyes and let the tears run down my wrist. When I was done, I read everything again. Then I took pictures of every page. The next morning, I called Mr. Harlan. His assistant put me through after I gave Dad's full name and explained that I had found a notarized document. Mr. Harlan sounded older than I remembered, formal but not cold. "Read the first paragraph to me," he said. I did. He asked for the date, witness names, and notary information. Then he asked me to email scan copies. An hour later, he called back. "This is consistent with the documents your father executed through my office," he said. "So it is valid?" "It appears valid, and I have the corresponding record here. Your mother does not have unilateral authority over the listed property. She plans to announce that Paige is taking control of it. A family announcement does not override a notarized document." I wrote that sentence down. What happens if she has already moved things? We determine what was moved and whether it can be recovered. Do not sign anything. Do not consent verbally. Communicate in writing. Did Mom know about this? There was a slight pause. She was present when the broader arrangement was discussed. Did she have a copy? She was provided documentation. That answer settled something inside me. Mom hadn't misunderstood. She had hidden it. I asked Mr. Harlan to send me a brief written confirmation in plain language. He did. The email was only 6 sentences long. My signature was required before the listed items could be permanently transferred. Carol could not designate Paige as sole decision-maker. Any action involving the identified assets required proper documentation. There was no dramatic legal threat. No courtroom language. Just a clean formal wall between what Mom wanted and what she was allowed to do. I spent Thursday evening organizing proof. Not all of it. I could have filled the dining table. There were years of receipts. The emergency plumbing repair Mom had called me about while Paige was on a weekend trip. The funeral flowers Mom claimed she had paid for. The catering balance for Dad's memorial. The insurance paperwork Paige told relatives she had spent weeks untangling. Even though she had texted me, "Can you please just fill this out and tell me where to sign?" I didn't need a mountain of evidence. I needed enough that nobody could pretend they hadn't seen it. I chose 2 bank statements showing transfers from me to Mom, 3 repair invoices, the funeral expense summary, 2 emails where Mom asked me to cover costs and not mention it because Paige is sensitive about money. A printed thread where Paige asked me to prepare estate paperwork before later telling Aunt Beth that she had taken care of the legal side. Then I found the voicemail. Mom had left it 7 months after Dad died. "Leah, call me back. You are the only one who actually handles things, and I need you to take care of this before Friday. Please do not bring it up with Paige. She gets upset when she feels left out, and I cannot deal with another emotional situation." I played it once in my kitchen. Her voice sounded ordinary. That made it stronger. I printed the accidental email with the full header showing the sender, date, and original subject line. I printed the speech draft exactly as she had written it, including the notes in the margins. I placed Dad's letter and notarized document in separate clear sleeves so nobody could claim I had altered them. Finally, I drafted an email titled "What Mom Left Out." It wasn't a manifesto. It was 9 short paragraphs explaining what I had paid, what I had handled, what Mom had privately admitted, and what Dad's paperwork required. I attached only the essential documents. The recipients were limited to relatives directly involved in the anniversary dinner and decisions about Dad's property. I didn't send it. I saved it as a draft. On Friday, Mom left me 3 voicemails. In the first, she said we should talk privately before the dinner. In the second, she said Paige was devastated that I had accused her of manipulating anything. In the third, she said, "Your father would hate what you are doing to this family." That one almost made me call back. Then I looked at Dad's letter. "You do not owe anyone silence just because they call it loyalty." I didn't respond. Saturday evening, I arrived exactly on time. Mom had chosen my aunt's large dining room for the gathering because it could hold the folding tables. Cars lined the street. Through the front window, I could see the family slideshow playing on the television. Dad at 20, Dad holding Paige as a baby, Dad teaching Jonah to throw a ball, Dad standing beside me at my high school graduation. The front room smelled like baked ham, coffee, and the sweet frosting from a store-bought sheet cake. Relatives were rearranging metal folding chairs, even though Mom had taped a seating chart to the wall. Aluminum pans covered the kitchen counters. Someone had brought 3 trays of deviled eggs. A cousin was trying to find an outlet for a slow cooker. Children ran between adults carrying paper plates. Near the guest book sat a glass jar with a handwritten label. Family expenses. I looked at it longer than I meant to. I had paid the cake deposit, table rental, memorial flowers, and half the utilities during the month Mom claimed she was recovering financially. Now she had placed a donation jar under a framed picture of Dad. Carol saw me from across the room. She wore a dark blue dress and the small pearl earrings Dad had given her. She crossed the room with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Leah," she said, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "I'm glad you decided to act like family tonight." A few heads turned. I took off my coat. "I said I would be here." Her eyes dropped to the slim document envelope in my hand. "What is that?" "Something I brought." Her smile tightened. "This is not the night for one of your accounting exercises. It is your speech. I think you decide what kind of night it is." For half a second, the performance slipped. Her mouth flattened. Then Aunt Beth approached and kissed my cheek. "Let's all have a peaceful evening," she murmured. I looked at her. Peaceful for whom? She blinked and busied herself adjusting a bracelet. Paige was seated near the front beside Mom's place. She wore a soft gray sweater and had already arranged her expression into concerned sadness. When I walked past, she touched my arm. "Can we talk in the kitchen?" "No." "Leah, please." "Did you help write the speech?" Her hand dropped. "This is not the time." That is still not an answer. She glanced toward the relatives around us. Mom is already fragile. Why would you do this here? I haven't done anything. You came holding documents. You came knowing the speech. Paige lowered her voice. Nobody is saying you never helped. You keep repeating that because it sounds kinder than admitting you let her lie. She looked away first. Jonah sat at one of the folding tables, turning a plastic fork over in his hands. He gave me a weak nod. Hey. Hey. He leaned closer. Can we please just get through tonight? I plan to. That's not what I mean. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not taking sides. You already sent that. I just don't want Dad's night ruined. I looked around at the room I had helped organize, at the slideshow I had corrected, at the cake I had partly paid for. Then you should have said something when you learned Mom planned to use Dad's night to humiliate me. His eyes dropped to the table. I didn't read it. You didn't need to read it to ask whether I was okay. He had no answer. Dinner started with paper plates, crowded elbows, and strained conversation. Mom moved from table to table accepting compliments. The decorations are beautiful, Carol. You did such a lovely job. You thought of everything. She smiled modestly. I just wanted it to feel like Frank. Paige had bought 2 packs of gold napkins and picked up the cake. I had spent 3 evenings preventing the event from collapsing. When an uncle complimented the slideshow, Mom placed a hand on Paige's shoulder. Paige helped me pull all the memories together. Paige gave me a quick look. She said nothing. That was always how it worked. She didn't have to steal credit directly. She only had to stand still while it landed on her. After dinner, people moved their chairs toward the television. The sheet cake sat on a card table beside a stack of plastic forks. Mom dimmed the lights and stood beneath a framed photograph of her and Dad on their wedding day. She held the printed speech pages. I could see her handwritten edits in the margins. The room quieted. Mom began with Dad. She talked about his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he checked the locks twice before bed. She told a story about their first apartment. She paused in all the right places. People smiled. Aunt Beth wiped her eyes. For a few minutes I almost wished I could leave the truth alone. Then Mom turned the page. Family, she said, is not only blood. It is loyalty. It is showing up. It is remembering who held you before you could stand on your own. Paige lowered her eyes with practiced humility. Mom continued. Some children grow up and carry gratitude with them. Others grow up and mistake independence for strength. They create distance and call it dignity. The room shifted. People knew who she meant. A cousin glanced at me and then quickly back at Mom. I sat with my hands folded over the envelope. Mom described Paige as devoted. She called Jonah tender-hearted. She described herself as a mother who had given everything and asked for nothing. Then she looked directly at me. Some people only remember family when there is something to gain. A murmur moved through the room. Mom waited. She had marked the pause in her draft. My heart was pounding, but my thoughts were clear. She continued. Leah has chosen pride over family too many times. She keeps score where love should be freely given. She has made it difficult for us to trust her with the things Frank valued most. Paige stared at her lap. Jonah swallowed hard. Aunt Beth's face had gone still. Mom turned to the last page. That is why tonight I want to honor the daughter who stayed loyal. Paige will represent this family in decisions concerning Frank's personal keepsakes, our remaining family records, and the assets connected to his memory. She reached for Paige's hand. Paige has proven she can be trusted with what Frank left behind. Several relatives began to clap. Not everyone, but enough. I stood. The clapping stopped unevenly. Mom gave a strained laugh. Leah, please sit down. Finish the sentence, Mom. Her face tightened. This is not appropriate. Finish the sentence. Then I'll show them why you wrote it. Do not do this. You invited an audience, I said. I brought context. Nobody moved. I took the printed accidental email from the envelope and placed it on the table closest to Mom. The subject line was visible from where she stood. Final speech draft, don't send to Leah. Aunt Beth leaned forward. Mom's voice sharpened. You are making a scene. No. You made a program. I placed the speech draft beside the email. The margin showed her notes. Pause here, look at page, let my voice shake. A cousin nearest the table picked up the first page and read the subject line aloud under his breath. Page stood halfway. This is not the time, Leah. I looked at her. You knew the speech was coming. I knew Mom had written remarks. I didn't approve every word. Did you read it? She hesitated. That was enough. I turned to the room. Before everyone claps for that version, I want to show you the receipts for the version I lived. Mom scoffed. There. You see? Receipts. Always keeping score. No, I said. Keeping records. I took out the first bank statement. This transfer covered the plumbing repair after the downstairs pipe burst. Mom told several of you Paige handled it. Paige opened her mouth. I placed the invoice beside it. This was the balance for Dad's memorial catering. I paid it after Mom said the account was short. Another receipt. These were the funeral flowers. Another. This was the insurance paperwork Paige said she spent weeks resolving. I held up the printed text message. Can you please just fill this out and tell me where to sign? Paige's face turned red. Nobody is saying you never helped, she said. You keep saying that instead of saying I did. This is cruel. You had years to correct her, I said. You chose the applause. She looked toward Mom before answering, which told everyone more than her words could have. Mom's voice rose. Families help each other. Normal daughters don't bring invoices to dinner. Normal mothers don't build a public case against one daughter, using work that daughter did for them. You are twisting everything. I picked up my phone. Then your own words should clear it up. Mom's face changed. Leah. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. Leah, call me back. You are the only one who actually handles things, and I need you to take care of this before Friday. Please do not bring it up with Paige. She gets upset when she feels left out, and I cannot deal with another emotional situation. The voicemail ended. The silence afterward felt physical. Someone's chair creaked. A child in the hallway laughed, unaware of what had just happened, and an adult quickly led him toward the kitchen. Mom stared at my phone. That was private. It was also true. You recorded me? You left me a voicemail. Her eyes moved around the room, searching for the person most likely to rescue her. For years that had worked. She would cry, and someone would turn from what she had done to how badly she felt about being confronted. Aunt Beth stood slowly. Carol, she said. Mom looked relieved for half a second. Beth pointed toward the documents. Is any of this fake? Mom's mouth fell open. I cannot believe my own sister would join this. That's not what I asked. You have no idea how Leah speaks to me in private. Is any of it fake? Mom's eyes filled with tears. I did what I had to do to hold this family together. Beth's voice became firmer. Carol. Mom looked away. That was the first real crack in the room. Relatives began reading the pages that had been passed along the table. One uncle frowned at the funeral receipt. A cousin scrolled through the email attachments I had just sent. Because while the voicemail was playing, I had opened the saved draft titled What Mom Left Out and pressed send. Phones began vibrating around the room. Mom heard them. What did you do? I sent the documents to the people you invited into this. You had no right. You gave them a verdict. I gave them the record. Paige picked up her phone and opened the email. Her eyes moved quickly over the attachments. Leah, some of these are private family matters. So was the speech until Mom made it entertainment. You are taking things out of context. The context is attached. Mom gripped the back of a folding chair. You always have to make yourself the victim. I didn't write the speech. You drove me to it. No. You planned it, rehearsed it, and emailed it to Paige for approval. Paige looked up sharply. I did not approve that wording. I turned to her. Did you tell her not to read it? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I nodded. That's what I thought. Jonah hadn't moved. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Mom looked at him. Jonah, say something. He rubbed both hands over his face. I don't want to be in the middle. You are my son. I know. Then tell her this is wrong. He looked at me, then at the receipts. His voice was quiet. Leah did handle most of it after Dad died. Mom froze. Jonah swallowed. She handled the bills, the insurance calls, the house repairs, most of the funeral stuff. I should have said that before. Mom stared at him as if he had slapped her. You told me you weren't taking sides. I thought not saying anything was staying out of it. It was, I said. For you. He winced but nodded. Mom's tears spilled over. After everything I did for all of you. That sentence doesn't erase what you did to me, I said. She pressed a hand to her chest. You think a few bills make you a better daughter? No. I think lying about who paid them makes you dishonest. Paige stepped toward Mom. This has gone far enough. It has not, I said. I took Dad's envelope from the document sleeve. Mom saw his handwriting. The color left her face. That was the moment I knew for certain she recognized it. I held up the small note taped to the back. For Leah, when the story starts changing, I read. Nobody spoke. Mom whispered. Your father was very sick. He was clear enough to notarize documents through Mr. Harlan. Her eyes snapped to mine. Paige looked between us. What documents? I removed the notarized page and placed it on the table. This document requires my written approval before certain items belonging to Dad can be sold, transferred, donated, or permanently given to one family member. Paige's expression shifted from outrage to confusion. What items? His watches, his military keepsakes, the family records, the signed business documents, several other assets listed here. Mom interrupted. That was an early draft. No, it was executed and notarized. He changed his mind. Mr. Harlan has the corresponding record. You called him? Yes. This week. The morning after I read your speech. Mom's hand tightened on the chair. I took out Mr. Harlan's email. His confirmation is attached to the email everyone just received. My signature is required. Mom does not have unilateral authority, and she cannot appoint Paige as sole decision-maker because she gave a speech. A few people shifted in their seats. One of my uncles, who had always been more comfortable discussing paperwork than emotion, held out his hand for the page. I passed it to him. He read silently, then looked at Mom. Carol, did you know about this? Mom wiped her cheeks. Frank discussed many possibilities. That is not an answer, Beth said. Mom snapped. Stop interrogating me. Beth didn't flinch. Did you know Leah's consent was required? Mom looked around the room. I knew Frank wanted everyone involved. That is not what this says, my uncle said. It specifically names Leah. Paige turned to Mom. You told me Dad wanted me to manage the keepsakes. He trusted you. Did he write that? Mom's silence answered. Paige's face changed again. Not into remorse. Not yet. But for the first time that night, she looked less like the chosen daughter and more like someone realizing the stage under her had been built over a hole. I unfolded Dad's letter. This was never only about my attitude, I said. This was about making sure nobody objected when Mom erased my signature. Mom shook her head rapidly. That is disgusting. You are accusing me of stealing. I'm accusing you of hiding Dad's instructions and trying to discredit me before announcing a decision you couldn't legally make. I was protecting the family from your need to control everything. I didn't ask for the authority. Dad assigned it. Because you manipulated him. That was the first openly ugly thing she said that night, and the room reacted. Beth inhaled sharply. Jonah looked up. Even Paige said, Mom. I kept my voice level. He gave me the envelope before he died. Mr. Harlan has the office record. Are you saying the notary, the witnesses, and the attorney were all manipulated too? Mom's mouth trembled. You always think paperwork makes you right. No. Paperwork makes it harder for you to change the story. I read one paragraph from Dad's letter. Not all of it. The rest belonged to me. You are the child she trusts with work and distrusts with recognition. That is not because you have failed her. It is because giving you credit would force other people to face what they have avoided. Jonah shut his eyes. Paige looked down. Mom said, "He was angry when he wrote that." Maybe. He was also accurate. I showed the banknotes next. Dad also documented money he gave Mom after his settlement. It was supposed to remain available for all three of us if there was a real need. Paige's head came up. What does that mean? It means it wasn't supposed to be treated as a private fund for one child's debts or another child's repeated mistakes. Jonah looked stricken. I never asked for Dad's settlement money. You may not have known where it came from, I said. Paige turned to Mom. Did you use that money for my credit cards? Mom's voice became defensive. You were going through a difficult time. That is not what Dad intended. He was my husband. I knew what he intended. Then why did he write it down differently? I asked. Mom's breathing became uneven. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted to turn everyone against me. No. You came prepared to destroy me. I came prepared not to be destroyed. She flinched as if I had shouted. I hadn't raised my voice once. That seemed to make it worse for her. She knew how to handle rage. Rage could be called instability. A broken plate could become the story. A scream could replace every fact. I gave her none of that. Relatives began asking questions. Why had Mom said Paige handled the funeral paperwork? Why had she hidden Dad's letter? Had any of the keepsakes already been promised? Where was the settlement money? Why did the speech call me emotionally unfit if Mom had privately trusted me with every serious task? Mom tried to answer all of them at once. She said grief had made things complicated. She said Paige needed support. She said I had always been difficult. She said Dad changed his mind constantly. She said nobody understood how much pressure she had carried. She said the wording of the speech was harsh but true in spirit. The tears no longer ended the conversation. That was new. Beth picked up the accidental email again. You were going to call her a walking stain in front of everyone? Mom shook her head. I might have changed that line. You wrote slow down here beside it, Beth said. A few relatives looked away. Not because they doubted me. Because they were embarrassed to remember that they had been ready to clap. Paige sat down heavily. Nobody told me about a required signature. You knew I was doing the paperwork, I said. That's not the same thing. You knew Mom publicly gave you credit for work I did. She was trying to make me feel useful. And you let her make me look useless to do it. Paige rubbed her forehead. You don't understand what it's like being the one Mom expects to be perfect. I almost admired the speed with which she found a way to become injured by being favored. I understand more than you think, I said. But pressure doesn't excuse dishonesty. I never asked her to attack you. You just asked me not to defend myself. That is not fair. It is exact. She looked at the relatives around us, searching for support. This time nobody rushed in. Jonah stood. His chair scraped against the floor. I'm sorry, he said. Mom looked at him hopefully, but he was speaking to me. I knew you did more. I knew Mom called you for everything. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business because I didn't want another fight. I nodded once. You benefited from that. I know. You called it neutrality. I know. He looked sick. I should have said it before. Yes. He waited, maybe expecting me to make him feel better. I didn't. Mom shook her head at both of us. Look at what she is doing. She is turning you against your own mother. Jonah's voice was still quiet but firmer. No. You asked me to say something. I am saying what happened. Mom sank into her chair. For a moment, the room was filled only by the sound of the slideshow music. Someone had forgotten to pause it. Photographs of Dad continued appearing on the television while the family he left behind argued beneath them. A picture came up of Dad holding the blue recipe box. I had taken that photo years ago. I looked at it and felt my grief settle into something steadier. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, leaving copies on the table. Then I said what I had practiced alone in my kitchen. Here is what happens next. Mom laughed bitterly. Of course you have rules. Yes. I looked at her first. I will not pay another family bill without a written agreement about what it is, who is responsible, and whether I am being repaid. No more private emergencies followed by public stories that somebody else handled them. She opened her mouth. I continued. I will not organize another event, clean up after one, prepare paperwork for someone else to claim, or fix problems in secret. Paige crossed her arms. That sounds punitive. It's an exit. I looked at Jonah. I will not accept. I'm not taking sides from people asking me to stay quiet. Silence that protects a lie is a side. He nodded. I looked back at Mom. Every decision involving Dad's listed property will go through Mr. Harlan and be documented. Nothing gets sold, transferred, donated, or handed to Paige because you announced it at dinner. Mom's voice shook. You would drag your father's things through lawyers? You already dragged them through a speech. A cousin covered her mouth, hiding a reaction. I continued. If you tell relatives that I abandoned you, refused to help, stole from the family, manipulated Dad, or caused this conflict without mentioning the evidence, I will send them the full timeline. So you're threatening me. I'm telling you what information will follow the story you choose to spread. You want to humiliate me forever. No. I want the lying to become inconvenient. Her face hardened. There she is. Cold as ever. I looked at her for a long moment. I am not here to beg for a place in this family. I am here to resign from the role you gave me. What role? Wallet. Cleanup crew. Secret keeper. Villain. The words landed one by one. Paige looked toward the kitchen, where dirty serving spoons, foil pans, and stacked plates waited. Normally, I would have already started cleaning. I picked up my coat. Mom stood again. You cannot leave after doing this. I can. You ruined your father's anniversary. No. I interrupted your campaign. Everyone will remember this night because of you. They should. I slid Dad's original letter back into its envelope. Aunt Beth stepped toward me. Leah. I waited. Her eyes were wet. I'm sorry I called this a misunderstanding. Thank you. I should have asked you what happened. Yes. She winced, but I was done softening truth so other people could feel noble for arriving late. I believed Carol because she sounded so hurt, Beth said. I stayed quiet because I thought that was peace. Beth nodded slowly. I see that now. I put on my coat. Paige said, You are really leaving? Yes. Before cleanup? I looked at her. For the first time all evening I smiled. Yes. Then I walked out. My phone began vibrating before I reached my car. I didn't look at it until I got home. There were 23 messages. Some were apologies. One cousin wrote, I had no idea you paid for Dad's memorial. I'm sorry I believed what I heard. An uncle said the documents looked clear, and that he wouldn't support moving any property until Mr. Harlan reviewed everything. Another relative wrote, You were right about the facts, but doing it publicly was cruel. That message almost made me laugh. Mom's speech had been public. My response was apparently supposed to be private enough to protect her. Paige sent 3 messages. The first said I had blindsided her. The second said she had never wanted sole control of Dad's things. The third asked whether I could send her a complete list of the estate paperwork I had prepared, because several relatives were now asking her questions. I replied with one sentence. Contact Mr. Harlan. Jonah called twice. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. I'm sorry. I know saying it now doesn't fix anything. I should have backed you up before there was proof on a table. I don't expect you to call back. I waited until the next afternoon to respond. I appreciate the apology, but I'm not cleaning up your guilt for you. What you do next matters more than what you say tonight. He replied, understood. Mom didn't contact me for 2 days. Instead, she called relatives. I knew because several of them forwarded me versions of what she said. She told one aunt that the speech was a private draft never intended to be read as written. That aunt replied with the email subject line. She told a cousin that Dad's document was outdated. The cousin forwarded her Mr. Harlan's confirmation. She told another relative that I had exaggerated my financial contributions. That relative asked whether Mom wanted me to send the bank records. For the first time, Mom had to choose between correcting herself and triggering more evidence. She corrected herself selectively. She admitted I had paid some expenses. She said the speech used unfortunate wording. She acknowledged that the keepsake decisions would require legal review. It wasn't accountability, but it was retreat. The transfer of Dad's property stopped immediately. Mr. Harlan arranged a formal inventory. 2 watches Mom had promised to Paige were returned to the locked cabinet where Dad had kept them. Boxes of records were moved into documented storage. A collection of letters that Mom planned to donate without consulting anyone was added to the review list. The settlement money was more complicated. Some of it was gone. Paige eventually admitted that Mom had paid off a large portion of her private debt after Dad died. Paige claimed she had believed the money came from Mom's personal savings. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was another polished half-truth. Either way, Paige had to produce records for expenses she had spent years accepting credit for managing. Relatives stopped automatically treating her as the responsible daughter. At the next family discussion, an uncle asked her a direct question about paperwork, and when she said, "Leah usually knows more about that," the room went silent. It was the first honest credit she had given me in years. I didn't thank her. Jonah started helping Mom with practical tasks. Not dramatically. He didn't transform into a perfect brother. He missed one appointment and complained about how difficult Mom was being. When he called me for advice, I told him to read the instructions I had already emailed. He said, "You used to just handle this." I know. There was a pause. Then he said, "Right. That was progress, but it wasn't absolution." Aunt Beth called me a week after the dinner. She asked whether she could come by. I said no. Not because I hated her. Because I was tired, and for once tiredness was enough reason. We spoke by phone instead. She apologized without mentioning family unity. She said she had confused Mom's confidence with truth and my silence with guilt. "That was unfair," she said. "Yes. I understand if you don't trust me." "I don't yet." She accepted that. Mom finally emailed me 9 days after the dinner. The subject line was family. The message was 3 paragraphs about pain, betrayal, grief, and disrespect. She said I had chosen the most humiliating possible setting. She said Dad would never have wanted his private letter used as a weapon. She said she hoped I would eventually remember that she was my mother. There was no apology for the speech. No acknowledgement that she had hidden the documents. No explanation for the money. I replied, "You plan to publicly discredit me before announcing a decision you didn't have authority to make." I responded in the room where you made the accusation. Future communication about Dad's property must include Mr. Harlan. I will not discuss reconciliation while you continue denying the conduct that caused the rupture. She didn't answer. For several weeks, the family split into predictable groups. Some people believed I had done the only thing that could have stopped Mom. Some believed I was factually right but morally wrong because I had embarrassed her. A few insisted both sides had made mistakes, though none of them could explain what my equivalent mistake had been before the dinner. And some stopped contacting me because my boundaries removed services they had quietly enjoyed. That hurt less than I expected. The first Sunday I didn't go to Mom's house. I kept reaching for my phone. I expected an emergency, a missing bill, a ride request, problem with a form, a reminder that nobody else knew how to reset the television or find Dad's old account numbers. Nothing came. At first, the silence felt like punishment. Then it felt like time. I made coffee, opened the windows, and sorted the papers in my blue recipe box. For years, that box had held evidence of what I gave everyone else. Receipts for their emergencies, copies of checks, notes about repairs, proof that I had shown up. I removed the duplicates I no longer needed. I kept Dad's letter. I kept the notarized document. I kept the speech draft too, not because I wanted to reread it, but because I no longer trusted the family to preserve any story that made them uncomfortable. At the bottom of the box, I found an old grocery receipt from a holiday dinner 3 years earlier. I had bought almost everything: turkey, butter, vegetables, pie crusts, coffee, foil pans, paper towels. Paige had brought a bottle of wine and posted a photograph with the caption, "Nothing matters more than showing up for family." Mom had commented, "My loyal girl." I stared at the receipt for a while. Then I threw it away. Not because it hadn't mattered. Because I no longer needed every old wound to prove the pattern was real. The important documents were secured with Mr. Harlan. The keepsakes could not be moved without my approval. The relatives who cared about facts had seen them. The people who preferred comfort had chosen it knowingly. I couldn't force Mom to admit what she had done. I could stop financing the version where she had done nothing. Months later, we held the first formal meeting about Dad's property. Mom attended with Paige. Jonah joined by phone. Mr. Harlan sat at the end of the table with a legal pad and went item by item. Mom was polite in the rigid way people are polite when consequences are present. When one of Dad's watches came up, she said, "Paige should have that." Mr. Harlan looked at me. I asked whether Jonah wanted to be considered, and whether the watch had any specific instruction attached to it. Mom started to say, "Frank would have wanted." Mr. Harlan interrupted gently. "We will rely on documented instructions and agreement among the required parties." Mom stopped. It was a small moment. No raised voices. No dramatic reveal. Just a sentence she couldn't talk over. We eventually agreed that the watches would remain together until all three of us had time to review Dad's notes. The military keepsakes would not be sold. The family records would be professionally copied before any originals changed hands. The remaining funds would be traced as far as possible, and no one would claim reimbursement without documentation. Paper remembered better than people. Dad had been right. After the meeting, Paige caught up with me in the parking lot. "Do you hate me?" she asked. It was the first direct question she had asked in a long time. "No." She looked almost disappointed by how quickly I answered. "I thought you would. I don't trust you." "That is worse. It's more useful." She crossed her arms against the cold. "I didn't know Mom was going to use those exact words. You knew she was going to make you the loyal daughter and me the problem." Paige looked away. "I thought if I challenged her, she would fall apart. So you let me take the hit." "I didn't think it would go that far." "It had been going that far for years. You just didn't have to feel it." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "I don't know how to fix it." "You start by not asking me to design the repair." She nodded. Then she said, "That sounds like Dad." It did. I left without hugging her. Maybe one day we will build something different. Maybe we won't. I no longer measure healing by whether everyone comes back. I measure it by whether I have to abandon myself to keep them. Mom and I now communicate mostly through email. She still slips in guilt when she thinks she can. She still says things like, "A daughter should not need formalities with her mother." I reply, "Documentation is required." She hates that sentence. That's not why I use it. I use it because it works. The last time she asked me for money, she said the family account was short and the expense was urgent. I asked for the invoice and a written breakdown of who was contributing. She never sent them. The emergency disappeared. At the next holiday gathering, I arrived with one dish. I ate, spoke to the relatives I trusted, and left before cleanup. Paige and Jonah stood in the kitchen arguing over where Mom kept the trash bags. I heard Mom say, "Leah always knew where everything was." For once, nobody called me back. I drove home with Dad's letter locked safely away, and no unpaid bill waiting in my purse. Some relatives still think I went too far at the anniversary dinner. Maybe public exposure should be a last resort. It was mine. Mom had spent years using private dependence and public contempt to keep me in place. Then she invited the family, printed 6 pages, marked where to pause, and turned her lie into a ceremony. I didn't burn down my family that night. I just stopped holding up the walls they kept kicking. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.